Great, it's about 1 minute after. I will begin the recording.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second meeting of our two-part series for this annual meeting of the T3 Innovation Network. We really appreciate you spending some time your Friday afternoon in December with us. We know that not everyone could be in attendance in person on this one, which is why we are recording this meeting. We'll be making it available to the network in the coming days. So thank you again for joining us. Hopefully you had also taken part in last week's meeting where we actually had a 2-hour session. Today's session will only be 1 hour. And what I'd like to do is introduce you to today's agenda. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. And while I'm going through this, I know some of you have already reverted to standard operating procedure with identifying who you are in the chat box. We encourage you to make use of that chat box. Please do introduce yourself to the network. And we ask that you be as active as possible in that chat. The thing we love about our T3 meetings and events is they're always interactive. It's about the network engaging one another, peer-to-peer exchange, learning, so on and so forth. And while we unfortunately cannot do this in person like we normally do, we'd encourage you to be as interactive as possible in that chat box with one another and also with our team managing the presentation. So please do include any questions or commentary that you have about today's topics. You'll see from the agenda what's in store for you today. We do like to pack our meetings in. So we have a full hour. I'm going to provide a very brief recap of what was covered last week in case you didn't have the privilege of joining us. And then what we're going to do is spend the bulk of our time hearing about the T3 network of networks. Naomi Sakarish, our project lead, is going to be providing you with an overview of the process we had gone through as our final work group. And she's also going to preview for you and highlight certain aspects of the T3 network of networks that we'll be launching next year. So we're going to hear from Naomi, and then we're going to pause halfway through and we're going to do a group activity. We're going to share with you a link to Mural. If you've been part of our recent meetings, you'll know how to use that collaboration site. If not, you're going to enjoy it. But we'll be throwing that link in the chat box at the appropriate time. And we're going to take 10 minutes to have a more interactive session with all of you. So that's coming soon. And then after we finish that group activity, we're going to come back here in the Zoom and we are going to hear from Daniel Saunders and team who are going to talk about the Resource Hub. Currently, it is the LER Resource Hub, but we have a vision for a more holistic T3 Resource Hub. And they are going to facilitate a conversation around that and ask you all some questions and capture your responses via a poll. Lastly, we're going to have a very short panel, mini panel. Basically, we want to make sure that in all our meetings, we are profiling the good work of the network and giving them a voice. And we had asked 3 individuals who will be introduced later today to provide a little bit of commentary about what their experience has been like with the T3 network and what they hope to get out of the T3 network of networks going forward. So we're going to move through this fairly quickly. If there is any remaining time, we will reserve that for some Q&A. So please do keep those questions coming. If we can't get to them during the presentation, we will surely get to them after the presentation. But that's our agenda for the next 60 minutes. So we're going to move expeditiously through it. And I'm going to do my final piece in the opening, which is a recap of session 1. So if we go to the next slide. Back on December 3rd, we had our first of the 2-part annual event meetings, and we had a great turnout, over 130 attendees to that meeting who are participated. It was a longer form session, 2 hours, where we accomplished quite a bit. I challenge you to find another Zoom 2-hour session that packed in this much content and this many speakers. But we were able to provide project updates on all 8 projects that have been part of our phase 2 strategy. This was the implementation of the T3 Innovation Network roadmap for how we'll achieve that and accelerate the digital transformation of the talent marketplace. We heard about projects that will help make all learning count. We heard about projects that will make competencies and skills the new currency of the talent marketplace. And we also heard about projects for how we will empower learners and workers with their data. So we got those updates. We heard from many of our project leads, and we also featured 3 demos of tools that were generated or produced by the T3 Innovation Network in partnership with all of you. So we heard about the Data Ecosystem Schema Mapper, the DESM. We heard about the Competency Framework Extraction Module, the CFEM. And we also heard about the OCF Collab, the Open Competency Framework Collaborative. So all 3 tools were demoed for the first time, and we were recorded those and making those available to you all. We then had an interactive showcase because we always want to hear about what the community's up to, what they're doing, and how it relates to the work of the T3 network. So we captured a mural that we'll be sharing with all of you, where you had kind of identified other project activities that you're involved in, either your organization or institution or coalition or initiative you're part of, that's related to the various topic areas that were featured earlier in the project updates. So we wanted to hear what else is happening in the space. We want to make sure people are aware of it. We want to make sure they're connecting to it. And yeah, it was a great session. We had a lot of participation. And then finally, we heard from 16 LER pilots. We kind of previewed the work T3 has done to support learning and employment records. And we've provided for the first time a showcase of some of the pilots that are featured in the LER Resource Hub. We have about 25 plus pilots in there currently. It's the largest global collection of LER pilots, and we heard from 16 of them. In 3-minute sprints, we marched through and we learned a lot about how folks are building out the LER ecosystem. 2 hours, packed content, lots in there. We have the recording, we have the demo recordings. We're going to make all of that available to you soon. So you're going to see a follow-up email in the next week that's going to go out to the full T3 network, where you'll have access to everything we've given you in these 2 annual meetings. So you'll have last week's content and you'll have this week's content. So we're excited to bring today's agenda with you for you. If you kind of hung into the bitter end of that last meeting, you heard from Naomi, who kind of previewed what's to come. And we wanted to make sure we created a separate space to talk about the T3 network of networks, because while we want to celebrate what's been accomplished to date and all the folks who have contributed into implementing this roadmap and making these projects possible, what we really wanted to do now is turn your attention to what comes next, because we are not done. We have a mandate to move this forward and to reconstitute the network as the T3 network of networks, and to keep this moving. And we have some ideas about, where can we declare victory and say job well done, but what's the work that remains? And how are we actually positioning T3 for the future? And making sure that we are aligning the mission to the needs of the network. So we didn't assume we had all the answers when we got started, but instead we recruited Naomi to join the team, to join the network, and to put together a process, a final work group, to get feedback from the network for how we should organize the future of T3. So with that, Naomi, I invite you to take the torch and help share or share with the network what you accomplished in the work group.
Thank you so much, Jason. I'm delighted to be here and have the opportunity to present the final report of the T3N² Work Group. I'm going to start by going over the high level of the objectives and the process that we followed. As far as objectives, the ultimate objective was to evolve the T3 network to a network of networks that achieves its ecosystem goals, sustainability goals, and adherence to core principles that T3 network had originally set out with. And to help everyone remember what those are, in case you missed the last meeting, they are listed on the right-hand side along with the 3 primary goals that Jason covered with respect to digital transformation of the talent marketplace. And then underlying this effort are these key drivers of transformation. And it's to make sure that T3 network adds value to its ecosystem. And then secondly, it wanted to make sure that we effectively engage our members. There's so much talent in our ecosystem, and we wanted to bring them more front and center to leadership roles, etc. Lastly, to mitigate risk, we wanted to make sure that the T3 network's good work is sustainable. So that was the objective that we set out with, and we realized that the four kind of key components of the final product would have to address governance models for a future network of networks, business models and organizational structure to get the work done, then staffing plans and estimate budgets for the operational details of how this work would get done. And then, as Jason had mentioned, we developed the three tools, the open source tools. And so those we would need to think about hosting and access options as well. So this kind of summarizes the objectives of the T3N² effort. Next slide. In terms of the methodology, we used four key steps that then were synthesized. So we started with leadership interviews, and this was to really set a context for the T3N² objectives. Then we went to an environmental scan where we identified 20 or more relevant organizations. We reviewed the history, operating model, and governance structures to find out what lessons could we take away and apply to T3. And where we didn't see the data like definitively coalesce around a certain direction, those were where we formed the questions for expert interviews. And we conducted over 30 expert interviews with about 30 expert consultants. We did 1-hour interviews and they provide additional input to help us kind of start to answer some of those initial questions about where the organization should be going. Of course, in parallel, we needed information from our membership. So we organized a work group where over 150 people volunteered, and we had 3 work group meetings, and we conducted surveys with our work group members to get some real time data and market research from our community. And this together produced a lot of rich information that we then synthesized and reviewed the final product. We had a lot of back and forth and negotiation of various points, but basically in the end, it laid out the transformation of services, business model, governance, and operations. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge some of the wonderful people who came to the table to talk one-on-one with me as we worked through this, to contribute ideas both orally and in the paper. So below you see T3N² reviewers and T3N² volunteer interviewees. And we really appreciate everyone's input along the way. So it's critical to understand in the backdrop, and this was something that we formulated as we worked, is this picture of what the T3 ecosystem really represents. And you see in the center of the image, the learner worker, and you see to the right about at the level of the learner worker's hand, you see issuers of credentials, and then you see verifiers of credentials. And it was framed as a simple problem that, and a lot of the technology diagrams align with this, that some people have data, they've issued credentials, other people need to verify those credentials, and our goal is to put the learner worker in the center of these transactions. At the same time, our ecosystem was quick to point out that regulations has a big impact on what gets done. And at the top, you see that customers, those citizens, wallet holders, individuals, and employers are ultimately driving the direction of what we do. Now, you see on the right, research policy has an interest in those transactions. And then in the bubbles underneath and kind of arcing around this triad in the middle, you see the number of organizations that take on different roles in these data transactions. And we wanted to really lay them out and have a chance to understand how these different groups will interact around data. Underneath at the very bottom, you see some boxes for tech infra vendors, standards orgs, data collaboratives, and other auxiliary organizations. And we realized that these types of organizations really form the backbone of this technology infrastructure for these transactions to happen. And so this picture lightly summarizes the different sectors that T3 Network brings together. Next slide. And it's really important because when we started to work, we realized that we needed more understanding of what this very diverse membership thought about T3. And when we did a survey to unpack that a little further, we had diverse representation across all of the sectors, and we found that T3's core value to its members is its convening power, the ability to assemble all of these diverse stakeholders around a shared topic and remain a neutral facilitator of dialogue and solutions identification. So the top 3 reasons that members come to the table is to participate in work group, collaborate, and connect with one another. Next slide. That said, we also asked, what work should T3 be doing going forward? And the top 3 activities that the group said T3 should pursue are work groups, global standards, and policy advocacy. Now, it's important to note that work groups was the first choice of 64% of respondents. Global standards was the first choice of 29% of respondents. So those 2 activities alone were the first choice for 93% of the T3N² work group respondents. Now, it's important to also note that global standards, when it was said in the work group, it does not mean that T3 is a standards body. It means that T3 can help incubate standards, advance the development of standards, but the expert standards bodies would remain the experts going forward. And we would just develop relationships and partner with these types of organizations to make sure that we service the needs of the ecosystem. Next slide. And we also wanted to know, what problems does T3 need to solve for our ecosystem and our membership? And we found a number of open-ended problem statements that we hand-coded to inform future work groups and activities. And so you see there in the chart that standards and adoption were really big, top of the list items, but you also see in there leadership, collaboration, alignment, governance, research, pilots, regulators, showcasing the work that is done in the network, government, bringing more international players to the table, and even showcasing vendor neutral requirements that different organizations can pick up and carry forward. So there was a broad range of problems that the membership responded they would like to see T3 help them solve. And we also, thought strategically around T3's position within the market and what we would do to add value. And some strengths to highlight is that T3 is a neutral player. Its brand name tied to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. People definitely saw this as value because the Chamber Foundation has a lot of success convening work groups and meetings and bringing parties to the table. Right now, we also highlighted the open source tech tools that were developed in phase 2, and many found that extremely valuable for going forward. So those were the strengths coming in, but we also recognize some weaknesses, that there may be too many simultaneous effort. We needed to streamline a little bit. We needed to get members contributing a little more actively, and we need to make sure that the core value proposition, the work of T3, is really clearly understood. And this actually would help people see T3 as not competitive to our member organizations, but symbiotic and sort of as an umbrella organization to help them advance. So the opportunity became to clarify the core value proposition, leverage its connection to the Chamber Foundation to engage the appropriate parties, like employers, like bringing government to the table as needed, and build upon its neutrality to serve as that umbrella organization to achieve a few specific tasks for the community good. We have to acknowledge some threats, and that our broad membership may slow our progress. So anything we do has to remain lean. And when you read the final report, you'll see some ideas for how to operationalize this in a really streamlined way. We have to make sure that we service our membership and that members and funders can come together and support this. And in a moment, you'll also see about some of our ideas for diversifying our funding streams for better sustainability. And lastly, this is a challenge for any member organization, aligning diverse stakeholder viewpoints, but that's something that T3 and its expertise in facilitating is primed to do. Now we're going to look ahead at T3 Network of Networks 2021 and what our work group and everyone who participated designed as a plan for going forward. Now, it's important to also remember that plans last as long as it takes to pen them. There's no set roadmap that is going to be unchanged. We're going to be agile and flexible as we work forward through these significant changes. But the first bucket of changes will happen around work group restructuring. The next will happen around ecosystem engagement. And that really talks about bringing the right people to the table in the right ways. We're also going to start to change the governance of T3, where in the past it's been a small group that has led the activities. We'll be expanding that over time to be a more member-driven governance approach. You'll also see business model shifts. Of course, if the work changes, the entire model has to change. And you see there in continuous improvement, because all of this, like I said, is not set in stone. We're going to be adaptive and flexible as we move forward, learn from the work, find what's successful, grow that, and be mindful of what we may try, which is great experimentation, but what may not be the best direction to continue to pursue. Next slide. And it's also important to note overall that this will not be overnight. So don't be afraid that anything you've gotten used to and you really value is going to suddenly disappear. We envision this happening in 3 stages, and these are aligned with Lewin's stages of change management, where you've got unfreezing, which is preparing, moving, where you actually start to make the moves to transition to new structures and processes, and then refreezing, where you kind of lock things into the future state once you've had a chance to test them and tweak them and make sure they're the right places to be. And also, it's important to note that this won't happen all at the same time. For example, the work groups will probably be further along and they'll start changing to the future state a little faster than will, for example, the governance and business model that will to some degree trail us working through the new work group structure. Work group restructuring. So I'd like to say one thing as an overarching thought to keep in mind is that what we're really after is a problem-solving infrastructure. So we're interested in organizing our membership in ways that we can effectively solve problems, effectively address high-value use cases that will come to the table. So what we envision is standing network groups around our core infrastructure components that we'd actually identified to some degree in the previous stakeholder diagram. The first you see is the learning and employment records, LER networks. The second is a data and technology standards infrastructure networks. And the third is a competency and skills infrastructure networks. Now, there's also some work that has been going on in phase 2 that we felt like needed a little more runway. So there's 2 carryover work groups, employment and earnings record standards and data collaboratives, that will carry over through 2021 and then merge with the aforementioned standing network groups. As we start to look at governance, it's important to note that this is envisioned as a lowercase g governance, where it's not supposed to be very tops down heavy, because the work groups are doing very meaningful, diverse sets of work. They're very unique from one another. For example, one may be actually developing gap filling infrastructure tools. Another may be developing LERs separately and working more on broad education, adoption, and policy issues. So the governance that might need to apply to those different areas will be unique. And the idea is that these work groups will be chartered and the charters will align with the overarching governance, but the overarching governance won't be so tops down heavy that it restricts the movement and the flexibility of the network groups underneath. It's also important to note that these groups will be flexible and they will be ways to charter additional groups focused on issues and also use cases to help solve those high value use cases that are out there that we identify or funders identify that we want to solve. Now, in this picture, what you also see is the Chamber of Commerce linkage. And in the first stage, this is stage 1, you're not going to see significant changes. We're just going to kind of bring a little bit more of membership into a steering committee, and we're going to stand up some advisory committees to help us move the work forward. These committees are like little brain trusts to guide us along some core issues that we're going to need to work through in 2021 and some things that are really important to our membership. Can I get the next slide? So to kind of dive into those committees, because they're often of interest to people, is the steering committee is what we're going to expand. And then underneath, you see this business operations committee. And this is just temporary for stand up to help us work through our business model, our sustainability models, et cetera. The governance committee will be critical to make sure that what we're doing can be course corrected and studied and be on point. This one will live into the future. Ethics and equity is a huge topic right now with AI and also with, the development of LERs and making sure we don't leave populations behind with technology advances. So this is one we also envision heading into the future. Policy and regulations is a way to get the ball rolling, and then we'll probably find a home within the LER network, network of networks and the task group there. And then the engagement committee is also one to get the ball rolling and make sure that we have the right players at the table. There's been a lot of discussion about employers being at the table in a critical mass to make sure that we're testing out our ideas, to make sure they have a voice, et cetera, since they are representative of the end user and they can bring additional end users to the table. And so the engagement committee will set out to make sure that government players and employers are all at the table as needed as we try to service these really high value use cases that we identify. Now, the top arrow had kind of mentioned the last slide that the steering committee will evolve to a business board of directors. And this is the idea that as we start to shape up the future, we may develop a freestanding entity that's a nonprofit, and that would come with additional governance requirements. So that steering committee would evolve to a provisional board. It would start to have additional people identified for a business board of directors. You see the Chamber of Commerce Foundation has not gone away. It stays involved in the entire picture. Next slide. And then it starts to evolve further. And here you see kind of like the future state where that business board of directors is strong, the governing board is robust. And what you see here is that the committees have been trimmed down. As I mentioned before, our work group commented that sometimes you can have so many committees that it becomes cumbersome to manage. So several of the committees are just for getting the operations stood up and making sure we have advisors to get us to the right place. But in the future state, we don't want to be burdened by a heavy tops-down governments. And then lastly, the important thing to discuss is how do we sustain all this? As we mentioned, that was one of our objectives when we set out. And the general idea here is, again, that it's not going to change overnight, but we have to see this gradual evolution away from total dependency on grant funding. What we'd like to do is evolve to bringing in opportunities for sponsorships and engaging our membership in contributions. Those will be dues, and those can also be offset by human power contributions. But the idea is that we have diversified revenue streams and everyone who's a part of T3 is contributing in some way. There's also opportunity for specialized mission-centric services, people identified matchmaking services and even consulting services and even implementation services around some of the tools that were discussed in the last presentation. So there's opportunities for additional revenue streams down the road, but the idea is that everyone's contributing and the network is working together to find those opportunities and make them equitable. Right now, suggested contributions are looking like $200 to $25,000, depending upon the size of the organization. But again, nothing's going to change overnight, and we'll have the business committee and the governance committee and the ethics and equity committee working together to make sure that we develop the right plan forward. All right, so now that you've seen that kind of vision for the future and the opportunities for membership to participate, we're going to do a group activity to kind of do some signups for where people are interested in participating. I'll pause and turn to Jason to introduce that activity.
All right, everyone. First of all, thank you, Naomi. Appreciate your leadership in organizing and facilitating the work group and for advancing these recommendations. As you can see, it was just a huge lift with not a lot of time, but with the incredible level of participation we had from over 100 volunteers and the just dozens and dozens who contributed towards interviews, and who provided a review of the developing report and the recommendations, we were able to make this possible. So this really is your report. It is a product of the network. But thank you, Naomi, for going through that. If you haven't already, please access the link in the chat box, which is going to take you to our mural site, our interactive space. And as part of that, we're going to ask you to go through the options that are available. There's 2 rows. The top row is the potential LER infrastructure networks. And what we want you to do is identify which of those potential networks, nothing set in stone, but where do you see yourself fitting in the T3 network of networks? Where does your organization, your institution, your company, where would they want to interface with future members? So we've identified a few that Naomi had previewed, the learning and employment record infrastructure, the data and technology standards network, the competency and skills network, which may be multiple networks, but where do you see yourself fitting? Where would you like to fit? You're not signing up for anything just yet, but you're letting us know where your interest lies. And we have a new one here around employment and jobs data, a potential network there. And if you have ideas of other networks that would be a high priority, where infrastructure is emerging, that where we need like light G governance for the community to come together to set priorities, to address use cases, but we need a forum, a place where these groups come together to do work. If you have other ideas about what are some of those core infrastructure networks that are ready to be part of this digital acceleration, we encourage you to identify them in the other. Next, the second row is the potential issue and use case work groups. So not just the core infrastructure networks, but what are the core issues that might surface, like ethical applications of artificial intelligence, where T3 network of networks can be a useful forum to actually identify these issues and to get a large network like T3 and these infrastructure networks responding to that challenger issue. Another issue could be equitable use of learning and employment records, but some of them could be use case focused. Naomi mentioned use case development is going to be such a core feature of T3 going forward. If we become a clearinghouse of use cases that impact the talent marketplace, what are those big use case topics that we might want to feature that could then be, we could be a bridge to make sure the right infrastructure networks can respond to those. We provided a couple for you here. Skills-based hiring, lots of potential use cases. Another one is prior learning assessment and credit transfer, but there could be so many more. But we want to create this layer of issue work groups and use case work groups that then connect to the core infrastructure networks. So we can work with the non-technical folks to be able to translate how those use cases need to go down to the technical layer. And we can all work as one network to help facilitate this digital acceleration. So we encourage you to put others in there. Don't feel like you need to make it pretty. Just get your ideas down or identify who you are. And then we'll go and clean this up and make sure it's a product that we can share with all of you. So keep at it. We got a lot of great input already. Hopefully, if you haven't accessed the link and you're liking what you're seeing, you'll access it now and go in there and add your input. Just grab one of those little sticky notes, pull it to where you want it, and then insert text, or you could generate your own sticky note. But thank you all for having contributed thus far. This is a terrific participation, exactly what we were looking for. And we can keep this open a little while longer as we return to the meeting. But just keep it coming. Keep that link open, and hopefully you did not close the Zoom feature, because that is where the rest of the meeting is going to be happening. And if you did, you wouldn't be hearing me now, so it's kind of moot. But great, Josh, I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but I think we got a terrific amount of feedback, and we can keep this open for a little while longer, but ready to transition when you think the time's appropriate. So we may keep our schedule. It's now good. Okay, well, finish your thoughts. And let's see if we can pop the mural link in again. I think some people are asking for it. So if you haven't had a chance to contribute while the meeting goes on, feel free to go in there and add your input. We're going to keep it open for the rest of the meeting, but let's add the mural link back in the chat box. But for now, I am going to now pass the torch to Danielle Saunders of Brayhive, who is going to lead the next session around the T3 Resource Hub. So you've heard about the T3 network of network. Well, first we did a recap of the first meeting, the previous 2 hours. You heard about the T3 network of networks. You've had an opportunity to kind of weigh in on where you see your organization fitting in this future infrastructure. But now we're going to talk about another very important tool that's going to be part of that infrastructure, the T3 Resource Hub. So Danielle, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason. We believe that the network's convening value can be exercised through a collaborative online space. So this is Danielle with Bright Hive. We have Chris on the line, co-founder of the Learning Economy Foundation, who will be developing this website. And if we go to the next slide, we're looking at a hypothetical sketch of a homepage, which I'll describe in just a moment. So in the T3N² work groups, we heard the community ask for collaboration, participation, and connections, with focus on work groups and standards. That was in the charts that you saw in the beginning of this meeting. We prioritized what T3 has the unique capacity to do: aggregating, organizing, and connecting, cognizant to build on and link to members' existing initiatives. So this website is for you. Please keep in mind the goals that you need community and coordination to achieve and how we can support those goals. While we're referring to this as the T3 Hub so far, the name isn't final. We haven't started building it, so we are discussing ideas today. On this homepage, we wanted to make navigation intuitive. So the resources will be accessible through role-specific entry points, as you see here. Each portal will take you to site resources with navigation tailored for that entry point. Many T3 members fall into multiple roles, so one poll question we'd like to ask you today is which entry point you might select first. So you should see a poll popping up on your screen with multiple choice. If you have any trouble accessing this, please let us know in the chat. We have more ways to contribute, which we'll be discussing momentarily. Okay. How are we doing on responses? And again, these are all potential ideas. So there's a lot of features that we're going to be talking about next. I want to put a big thank you out to the T3N² Work Group, since all these features were sourced from ideas from that input.
So I just closed the poll and we had about 65% of participation. And these were the results of what they found to be the roles that they would fit into.
Excellent. This is very exciting. So that first bucket, which had the most responses, would include some of the intermediaries that we were speaking to earlier, in addition to workforce and education. And this is great. This is really wonderful. So thank you for participating in this first poll. Perfect. Now we're going to go to those potential features for a first release on the next slide, with more functionality planned for a V2 release. In addition to these features, content on the site could support interaction like comments and forums to encourage discussion and transfer of ideas across work groups and committees. So the first section under homepage is what you just saw. And then the about and membership pages can contain principles, info on the governance Naomi just covered, background, and the membership page would allow you to join, view and join work groups, and see directories. So now you'll be seeing another poll popping up with which features you might be most interested in clicking on. You can select up to 2. And note that the site will also link to related chamber initiatives like JDX, the LER Hub, and TPM Top Pipeline Management. And the site will subsume the role of the current T3 website hosted on the US Chamber of Commerce Foundation website. Are there any questions about these features?
And so far, we only have 4 people that have voted. So remember, everyone's welcome to vote and you have up to 2 choices.
I'll give a little detail.
Now we're getting more numbers and we're at up to about 40 votes. So let's try to get a few more in and get closer to that number of 100. And I will be closing the poll in 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1.
Wow, exciting. Everyone should be able to see these results as well. We have the T3 network use cases coming in at the top, followed shortly by data standards directory and our data standards mapping, data collab. Oh, and I see, yeah, okay. So in the third place is view and join work groups. And then coming up after that, data collaboration overview or forum, and the T3 network calendar. Thank you so much for voting. This is really helpful for us. In fact, we're looking at an end of Q1, beginning of Q2 rollout and hosting a T3 Hub user testing group for your input on this site in Q1. If you're interested in participating, please email Chief Etheridge at the Chamber. His email should be coming into the chat now, and it's on the screen as well. We want to be discussing features, resources, UX considerations, the name of the site, and more. So this can be as useful as possible. If you didn't see a feature you would like, this would be a great place. We've tracked all the requests from the T3N² Work Group, and we'll be serving the group about additional features not listed here as well. So thank you for your early and continued feedback. And now Jason will be moderating our panel on the outlook of the T3 network of networks, unless there's any more questions here.
All right, I think we can move into our next segment. Again, with some remaining time, we'll address any questions, and I'll set your expectations on what to expect next and do some thank yous. But before we do that, we did want to make sure it wasn't just our team talking to you, but you were also hearing voices from the network itself. So we did invite 3 individuals. You see them all here. We're going to be joined by Kim Bartkus, Executive Director of the HR Open Standards Consortium, Marnie Baker-Stein, Provost and Chief Academic Officer of Western Governors University, and Frank Sissio, CEO and founder of IQ4. Hard to pick 3, but the logic behind this was to get 3 different perspectives who speak to different constituencies, who could kind of give you their take on what their experience has been with the T3 network of networks. So it would be perhaps generous to call this a panel. It's more kind of short commentary. So we have about 4 minutes for each panelist, where I'm going to ask 2 questions, and you could just address both of them in your remarks. The first is, given your experience with the T3 Innovation Network to date as a member, how has it added value to the work that you do? What have you gotten out of it? What's worked well for you? And then the second part is merely a question of, as we move to this next phase of work in the T3 network of networks, what do you hope to get out of it moving forward? What can it do for you? How can it help this ecosystem from your vantage point? So just a 2-part question, but I encourage each of you to use your 4 minutes as you see fit, and to share your story with the network and tell us about yourself and the work you're doing. So with that, I would ask Kim, if you're ready, for you to kick things off. So the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much again for inviting us to speak today. We're really excited about it. Just wanted to give, we're with HR Open Standards, and we develop standards for B2B system transactions. And we also have a network. It provides that network for people to speak. So we joined the T3, probably it was 2018, and there were several reasons we wanted to get involved. There was the, we are actually working already on a job data exchange project. So that's something that we worked with the T3 on. And so wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that one. But we also worked on the mapping project, and we also worked and are currently working on the employee and earnings projects. The JDX and the employment and earnings was just released as a candidate release this week. If you guys would like to learn more about it, please follow up with Josh or Jason. But I think what we got out of it most was being able to work with the other organizations. And I think that was one of the things that was brought up on the benefits is making sure that, you know, we're all working towards the same thing. We're not duplicating efforts, and we're making sure that we're putting the best tools out there, whether it's standards or other types of things for the community. And I think that's what we've really enjoyed doing, is getting that networking and that opportunity to work with other organizations. And we're really excited about being part of the next phase, which is the network of networks. And I've talked with, we've been talking with a bunch of different people in this community. There's a group called Data Standards United, which is a collaboration of a bunch of different standards organizations. And we're talking to the T3 network about some things that we might be able to do. It's just been really exciting. So one of the things maybe we talked about was maybe a one-stop shop. And I think that was something with that resource hub. So rather than just being an LER resource hub, it's more than that. And what we could do possibly is having, right now it has just very specific standards, but maybe we have a place for all of the standards in there. And in addition to that, we have use cases. So that's really what's helpful for the communities, are those use cases. We want to be able to say, yes, there's a standard, but how do they work together? Or I have this business purpose that I need it for. One thing that we came up with was ubiquitous, and especially in today's environment right now, is some type of regulations. How do we have some type of compliance for CPR training or immunizations? So that's something we're just really excited about being part of that with the Chamber and with the T3 network of networks to see how that's going to move forward. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim. And I can't say it enough. In T3, it all starts with data standards. We locked in early on in the network with identifying data standards as a core component of unlocking interoperability for this ecosystem. So just the work of all the standards bodies, we applaud you. We appreciate your contributions and your membership. It's a point of pride for us that we were able to help connect some dots, including working with the HR Open Standards Consortium community and their members, and bringing them to the table with many of the education partners. So this is why we think standards are at the very foundation of what we do. So making sure that the T3 network of networks continues to add value to the standards community is very important to us, and it's one that we look forward to working with Kim and so many others on as we move forward. So thank you, Kim. Really appreciate your remarks. Next, I'd like to invite Marnie to come join the conversation. And Marnie, you represent a different point of view and have a different constituency. Well, you do many things. Hard to say there's one bucket, but Western Governors University, a major higher education player, who's also doing deep work in the skills infrastructure space. So Marnie, I was hoping you can speak on behalf of your community and share a little bit about what you've gotten out of T3 to date, but how we could position ourselves to continue to add value to your community going forward and how you would like to interface with it. So if you're ready, the floor is yours.
Sure. So yes, I'm here with two hats on. I'm representing Western Governors University. We are a totally online competency-based university. We have over 130,000 students across the country. We're nonprofit, and we're very interested in the work of T3 and always have been, because we are keen to make sure that our competencies are aligned with open standards, and we are working hard to understand how attached skills data can also be represented in a standard that is interoperable and shareable across, for example, student information systems and HR information systems, as many of our students are working learners. So that's kind of my WGU hat, and for several years we've been working on a skills and competency and achievement architecture, and we're deep in the work on learning and experience records with big employers to understand how we can do exactly that. I'm also representing the Open Skills Network here, which is a group of higher education institutions and employers who are really dedicated to the future of skills-based education and hiring and the development of open tools to make sure that we can all do that better at scale, as well as the development of opened and potentially managed skills libraries across critical work sectors in the US. So into the future, we truly appreciate and align with the goal of the Open Competency Framework Collaborative to make competency frameworks readily available to humans and machines, right? That is really exciting. Providing equivalencies across these frameworks is a critical start to interoperability. The Open Skills Network, which WGU is a part of, sees itself as synergistic with this effort, in that skills and our emerging rich skills descriptor or standard or syntax that we're working on are a critical enabler of meaningful translatability. So a Rosetta Stone of sorts to help in making sense of framework alignments. For 2021, we hope we'll see a collaborative focus between OCFC and the Open Skills Network related to identifying and developing new features and capabilities on our current work on what we're calling the Open Skills Management Toolset, which is aimed at assisting both employers and educational institutions to author and publish skills at scale. For example, the Open Skills Network will be coordinating with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation to enhance toolset capabilities to include in-app search of third-party systems like Credential Engine and the Case Registry via integration with T3's OCFC projects. Higher ed has unfortunately been drawing alignments through frameworks of sorts across institutions at the course title description level for years, and yet students still get denied transfer credit when moving across institutions because course titles and descriptions don't get to the granularity that most faculty leverage when accepting or denying credit, right? Similarly, employers use fairly consistent function or job role labels to say, this is what we're looking for, but the competency and skills data associated with these roles is usually missing or lacking. And for this reason, assessment of job readiness and hiring decisions are still often made, subjectively or based on inefficient proxies without actual meaningful supporting data about what a potential candidate or employee is able to do based on their actual skills profile. And we truly believe that the collaboration between OCFC and OSN and WGU can really begin to move the dial on removing friction from earner-learner journeys into the future in really powerful ways. Super excited about it.
Thank you, Marty. I really appreciate your feedback and contributions there. Last but not least, Frank, if you're with us, I encourage you to unmute yourself and join the conversation. Would love to get your take on these two questions. What have you gotten out of T3 to date, and what do you hope to get out of it in the future? And really kind of share with us your vantage point as a technology company and someone that works with many institutions to deliver solutions. So Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason. So it wasn't too long ago that we met with Marty in Washington in March, just before the breakout. And that was at the T3 meeting where we convened to kind of go through what everybody has heard here. And just to put some context here, IQ4 is a technology company. So our focus is on how could we build technology to transform the learning economy, to enable a skills-based marketplace. And that's quite a bite to take out of the apple. But ultimately, where we saw things going, and we've been working on this almost 8 years now, is we needed to build out, from a tech perspective, a workforce development platform, an environment that could enable the learner and focus on the learner as the center of the universe to understand the skills that they have based on what they've learned, and where can they go with those skills in an ongoing way. So providing kind of two things. One is the mechanics, right? What is it that we need to do to build on everything, all the great work that T3 is doing, and many of the partners within the group. And among a few things, our first focus, or our key focus with regards to T3, and what it did for us was it really kind of articulated what some of that technology needed to look like, specifically the LER. So our goal, about this time last year, we ended up in partnership with IBM and the National Student Clearinghouse, and our goal was to instrument the LER, to be able to take all of that architecture and make it work and provide it as a tool. And so what the three of us brought together, besides IQ4's tech, was NSC's incredible amount of data and visibility and knowledge into the educational marketplace. For those who don't know, they currently have about 21 million students in their enrollment data, and we felt it was key to help to engage that market, and IBM with their blockchain cloud to validate data and do this on a massively scaled basis. So the use case was really all about the journey of learning and employability. And the character that was defined was Izzy. Izzy was a community college student who learned what her skills were that enabled her to understand career pathways and jobs live in the market that she could engage, and also highlight the gaps that were needed to be filled in terms of course recommendations. It also provided the educational institutions the ability to create and understand supply and demand between what industry was looking for, employers, and the students, the student resources themselves in terms of this notion of a supply demand skills market. And last, the ability for industry to focus on the pipeline and be able to use a skills-based infrastructure to find and build talent. And so that was extremely successful. We wrapped up the pilot last month. And where I think we're going is kind of probably two words that best describe. It's the S word, standards. Still need to continue to focus. I'm glad to hear that, so that we could all be talking on from the same hymn book. And the A word, awareness and adoption. I think it's really critical that T3 could play a role to create and continue to create that awareness in industry and education, to try to mobilize the sectors, and also from an adoption perspective to help people understand what they need and the tools that they can provide or that could be provided to help them to enable a skills marketplace. Over to you, Jason.
Thank you, Frank. Much appreciated. And thank you, Kim, Marnie, Frank, for your contributions today. We know it's a lot to pack in just a handful of minutes, but you did terrific. So thank you for that. And now what I'd like to do is just do a few quick acknowledgements. Please don't run away. It's very important we do this part because this has been a long journey over these 2 years. And if you count phase 1, 3 years. So terrific amount of work's been done. I just want to impress upon everyone that we would not be here today, but for our funders who actually believed this was a conversation worth investing in and to keep going and to implement this roadmap. So great many thanks to Microsoft Philanthropies, Gates Foundation, Lumina Foundation, ETS, Google.org, the Annie Casey Foundation, and Walmart. Without their generosity, we would not have been able to do any of the work that you heard about last week or today. And then also wanted to thank the many folks who have been leaders in this work and who have stepped up and actually developed tools, who have facilitated work groups, who have published reports. There are so many. I was just trying to make a list because I wanted to acknowledge them. And Lord knows I would not be able to even repeat all of them who have contributed. But I'm going to try to name a few just to give you a sense of the breadth, the amount of energy that this phase had and the amount of contributions from individuals. So if you would permit me, just wanted to acknowledge Bob Sheets, Matt Gee, the Bright Hive team, including Tom Plaguey, Daniel Saunders, Natalie Evans-Harris, Phil Long, our LER community manager, Naomi, who we heard from today, Stuart Sutton, Jeannie Kitchens, Phil Barker, Jim Goodell, Alex Jackal, Andrew Reamer, Chris Purifoy, along with Taylor Kendall and Duncan Cox, Steve Midgley, Robbie Robson, Joel Gernon, Michael Moon, Kim Hamilton Duffy, Yvette Chocolade, Julie Squire, and I guarantee there's more, but these folks have gone above and beyond in terms of contributing their time, their energy, and their leadership. And for those and many more who I didn't have the opportunity to mention there, but thank you. Thank you for everything you've done, your contributions. I know there isn't enough resources we could ever give you that would truly cover the work that you've given back to us. So, I like to say T3 is a labor of love, and these folks have given it a lot of love. So, of course, thank you to the network itself. Without the 500 plus organizations opting into the conversation, we would not be here today. Thank you to the chamber staff who have supported this, including Chief Etheridge, but a special thanks to my colleague, Josh Westfall. When we recruited Josh to join the chamber team, I believe it was his first official day on the job. He was told to hop on a plane and fly out to California because you're going to attend a meeting at Workday's facilities where we're kicking off this project that doesn't even have a name. We're going to talk about data interoperability, and it's been a heck of a journey since. So special thanks to Josh for joining the team to help organize and lead this effort and for sticking with it. So thank you to everyone. Again, we are we are not done. We're just getting started. So this successfully brings us to a close of phase 2. We are going to be making some major announcements early next year about the launch of the T3 network of networks. Next week, we are committed to getting you all the videos and presentations and demos, everything you're going to need, and we will be issuing a public version of the T3 Network of Networks Work Group report. So much to come, but thank you. You've been generous with your time as always, and as we bring the year to a close, we bring this phase to a close, but we hope you will join us early next year as we launch this next endeavor. So to one and all, thank you.